Welcome, everyone. This is Craig Rosenberg, the Funnelholic. I am a student of sales and marketing. I like to write about sales and marketing. I like to read about sales and marketing, and I love projects like this where I get to go out and talk to some of the brightest thought leaders in the space and learn more about what they're seeing today. The purpose of today is I'm working with Lattice Engines to compile content around what it takes to be a successful sales leader today. And so what we've done is we've reached out to a number of thought leaders and put together videos, and we're going to put together an ebook and blog posts around the topic where, various thought leaders will, tackle different subjects. And so today we have one of the uh, I'm going to say this, one of the hottest thought leaders in the space. I can't go anywhere without seeing sales benchmark index being brought up, and it has a lot to do with, not only the personalities, but how they market and how they present themselves. It's really impressive organization, and so I'm very excited to have Greg Alexander here today from Sales Benchmark Index. And I just want to say before I have you introduce yourself, Greg, the purpose of today is there's a million things Greg can talk about actually, because his group takes on a variety of different segments and issues and processes that modern sales organizations take on. So I wanted Greg on the thing, and then I had to figure out what I wanted you to talk about. And what we decided on was to talk about um, how the modern sales leader does and should, uh, you know, thoroughly understand their buyer and what it means to map the process and what that means to your overall sales organization. It's a great topic. And so, Greg, thanks for coming on today. Why don't you spend a minute or two talking about yourself, and we'd love to hear, tell the audience about you.
Sure. So, Craig, thanks for having me. And my name's Greg Alexander. I'm the CEO of Sales Benchmark Index. And for those of you who are not familiar with SBI, as we're known, as we are a B2B sales and marketing consultancy. And we like to think we help our clients, quote, make the number faster and easier. Um, Prior to founding SBI 7 years ago, I spent my entire career in sales. I mean, I was hired off the college campus at University of Massachusetts as a inside sales rep and had every job you can think of. And my career culminated as vice president of sales and marketing for two public companies. One was EMC Corporation, and one was Recall, which is a not as well known as EMC, but a competitor to Iron Mountain, if that helps you think about it.
Yeah. So that was a very humble presentation of himself. I can't tell you guys enough how excited I am to have Greg on with us today. But instead of spending all our time talking about ourselves, why don't we dig into some of the issues? So, again, what we're trying to do is say to a sales leader, Greg, here's what a modern sales leader is doing to be successful, and we'll give you some examples, et cetera. And what I really wanted to dig in was your guys is we could start with kind of the philosophical view of understanding the buyer, and then we could talk about some of the tactics you do to get there. So let's talk a little bit about your approach and philosophy around understanding the buyer personas and mapping the buyer process, and we'll just kind of talk from there and dig after that.
Sure. So we try to work backwards from how the buyer buys. And I know everybody's talking about that, and it sounds so obvious, but sometimes the best ideas are the simplest ones.
Yeah.
And I believe that right now, and probably for the foreseeable future, we're in a period of time where the buyer is figuring that out for him or herself as well. There's all these different ways now to consume information, to become aware of a problem that you may have, to recognize that there's a better way to do X, Y, Z. And as people stumble across this, because we're now all walking around with supercomputers in our hip pockets, how they begin to engage with a marketing message, a salesperson, is fundamentally changing every single day. So what are the implications of that? So the implications are, if you're an old crusty sales guy like me, you grew up at a time where the mobile phone didn't exist. The search engine wasn't around. Nobody used email, right? So when a buyer had a problem, the very first thing they did was meet with the vendors and say, hey, here's what my challenge is. How can you help me? And the vendors had, an information advantage. And they could get in really early and shape the conversation. Right around this time is when things like spin selling, which is question-based selling, solution selling, consultative selling, strategic selling, all of the classic sales methodologies that served us so well for so long emerged. And sales organizations that embraced those things and sold that way outsold those that did not. But today, think about it. If you go in to call on a buyer and you open up with 25 questions and the buyer only has 30 minutes to meet with you, you're not going to get anywhere.
Yeah.
So understanding where the buyer is in their journey and beginning your sales process from that moment and being bright enough and capable enough to spot where they are, top of the funnel, middle of the funnel, bottom of the funnel, and focusing on facilitating the buyer's journey versus selling somebody something is, in my opinion, arguably the most important thing a sales organization can do today.
So, so we work backwards from how they buy. Tell me about how how clients, or not clients. We're not supposed to. This isn't just for you, Greg, but I'll throw that in. I'll slip in things like clients, but no, tell I do this too, and I'm really curious. I'm learning a lot from folks like you. So, how do you do that? I mean, how do you map the buyer? I mean, how do you get inside their head, and what are the exercises or things you need to go do to do something like that?
Yeah, so the recommendation I would give to people is to start with a working prototype of a B2B buying process. And there's several really good ones out there. We have one, but there's a bunch of them. And because you got to start with something. If you don't start with anything, it's almost like the task is too big. You get paralyzed and you don't even know where to go.
Yeah.
And we believe that you start with, quote, not in the market. So this is resting state, status quo. I'm Mary Sue. I live in Kansas City. It's Monday morning at 8 o'clock, and I have no idea that you exist, Mr. Vendor, and I don't have a problem. I'm not actively in the market for your products and services. So we think that's where it really should start. And then something happens to me. I get, quote, stimulated, which is the second phase. Sometimes people call this a trigger event, which is a word that I like, and there's several trigger events. Maybe I get a new boss. Maybe we launch a new product. Maybe the competition drops their price by 30%. Who knows? Something happens, and it propels me into the market for a product or service.
Yep.
And when that happens, when you map a buying process, what you need to be thinking about is what we call the micro decision. So what are the questions that the buyer needs to answer? What are the information needs that the buyer has in order to progress logically to the next step? And what I think happens many times when people try to do this is they focus on the macro decision. So they're trying to get somebody to go from one phase to the next. And that's too big of a leap, especially early in the buying process. What you want somebody to do is progress sequentially through the phase they're currently in. So to use this example, if the phase is stimulated, which is, the first moment that I become aware of a challenge that I may have, what are the questions that I'm asking? So maybe, let's say I'm a VP of sales, and my top rep walks out the door. So this is the trigger event. So I might ask myself, well, why did he or she quit? The next top sales rep, is that person vulnerable? Where did the top sales rep go? So these are questions I'm asking myself, what I call micro decisions, that I need answers to, right? So if somebody's selling to me in that situation and they're helping me think through that and they're providing me educational content, they're helping me move through the buyer's journey and progress through.
Yeah.
So to do this, there's really only one way to do it, and that is you have to go speak to the customers. So if you're a sales leader reading this ebook or watching this video or listening to this podcast, the very first thing you've got to say to yourself is, how well do I really know my customer and how well do I really know my prospect? And can I go out and speak to them directly and share this kind of B2B buying process prototype and get their input? It's as simple as saying, hey, do you do this? I'm trying to understand the trigger events for you. What are they? And then step by step, little by little, you chip away at it. And it's something that isn't a one-time event. It's something that needs to be updated all the time because, as I said earlier, the buying process is changing. It seems like daily these days.
Yeah.
That's how it's done.
Is and then when you talk about content, so this, everyone talks about sales and marketing alignment from a lead definition perspective, but it sounds like I'm assuming the content needs to be provided by marketing. Well, maybe not, but how? Well, actually, let me put it another way. I just kind of jumped down the road. To get people through the step, you have sequential content. How do what's how do you get there? I mean, is the organization has to build itself to provide content, and is that sales? Is that marketing? How do sales get their hands on it? How do they know when to deliver it, et cetera? So,
Yeah. Well, so content is key, obviously, and I'm stating the obvious here. I have a hypothesis that says content will actually be your best salesperson going forward. Um,
I'm tweeting that.
for
Sorry.
example, um, I'm working with a client right now, and we just went through an exercise I found fascinating. The exercise was he stack ranked his salespeople 1 through 1100, believe it or not, top to bottom, best to worst, based on production numbers. We then performed a content audit and did the same thing for every piece of content that he is presenting to his customers and through all of his channels.
Hmm.
We stack ranked it top to bottom, best to worst. And then we put these two stack rankings next to each other. And I asked the sales leader a single question. If you had to bet your career on the content or the reps, who would you bet it on? And he bet it on the content
Hmm.
because the numbers that were coming from the content were astounding, and it was consistent and repeatable. But I didn't answer your question. I got off on a tangent.
No, that was that was the most amazing example. I appreciate that actually. So,
yeah.
Go ahead.
So to produce the content, you really have two choices, right? You can do it yourself or you can outsource it. It's our belief, this is just SBI's belief, that this is something you don't want to outsource. We don't believe that outsourcers will ever know your customers with a degree of intimacy that they need to know them to be able to write content that resonates with that target audience. So we recommend doing it internally. So how do you do it internally? We advocate for standing up what we call an internal content marketing agency. And this is literally a net new department that sits within the marketing department. It's an internal service bureau. And they're a publisher. And their job is to take these buying process maps and these buyers' journeys and buyer personas. And they have an editorial calendar and a production schedule. And they produce content as if they were an agency. And they have two primary stakeholder groups that they're trying to serve. So the first stakeholder group is the marketplace, the customers and prospects and what their needs are. And then the second stakeholder group is the sales force. So when the sales force does get engaged, they need to have a meaningful conversation with the customer. So that means they need job aids, they need tools, they need case studies, testimonials, all of the traditional stuff. And this internal content marketing agency, we have found, is the most effective way to produce content on a consistent basis.
And so, just to be clear to the audience, because I think you and I both know, the content they're providing to sales is focused on the buyer. That we're not talking about data sheets and case studies, although at some point those are part of the mix. Tell us more about that. I know I'm backing up a bit, but now I get it. So we have an agency. What is the content that we create that we provide to salespeople, and what does that look like?
Yeah. So really, they're all around the market problems of the buyers, right? So depending on who you're selling to, that could be a little or it could be many. And you want to train the sales force on being able to walk into a prospect and have the prospect inside of the first 10 minutes say, boy, this person really knows my business. And to be able to say, hey, Craig, when we work with clients like you, we typically find one of their business challenges is, ABC. Are you having that challenge? Yes, no. If you're having that challenge, here's a couple of examples how some other people have solved that. Here's how you might think about, going after this. And it's a very different approach than walking in and, plugging into the AV system and firing up a software demo and saying, let me show you my product. very different approach. And what I find in the implementation of this is challenging, and here's why. Many times the prospect's problem, the solution involves your product, but also other products
Yeah.
and other services.
Yeah.
And the salespeople want to just say, here's how we can help you. But if it's an incomplete solution, the buyer is going to stop and leak out of the funnel because it's not going to solve his or her problem.
Right.
So the salesperson needs to be able to say, listen, this is our piece of the puzzle, and it's an important piece, and here's why. But oh, by the way, you need these other three pieces. Have you thought through that? Which is a heavy lift, and a lot of salespeople don't want to do it. But if you don't do it, the buyer is not going to take the action you want him to take. Or if he or she does take the action, it's going to happen 5 years from now because it's going to take him forever to figure this out on his own.
Got it. So that's coupled with sort of, this idea of content advancing the buyer, and now you're talking about how we have to get our salespeople to embrace this new sort of way of looking at the world, which is about helping the buyer first. That's a great example. And is that, you just mentioned it, and I think I'm being redundant, but is that hard for the sales leader to understand?
Yeah, it is. Partly because we've drilled into them to behave differently for so many years.
Yeah.
And we continue to drill into them the wrong way to be. So, for example, if you audit sales training programs, it's very disappointing. People are still doing things like training salespeople on how to quote unquote close the deal. When you ask a customer, how can I close you? You can see in their body language they almost want to throw up. Nobody wants to be closed, right? So
Yeah.
why would you train a salesperson on that, or
Yeah.
negotiation skills or objection handling? And there's literally hundreds of millions of dollars that's wasted on this stuff every year. And, just simply changing that and training the salespeople on helping the buyer results in a productivity lift.
Yeah. That is really interesting. And so, I wanted to understand a bit about how you recommend people handle. Um, so I don't know if the stats right. Forgive me for just throwing it out, but I'm sure you've seen it where decisions now. You're working with B2B, um, sales and marketing departments. So complex selling environments where there's more than, in some cases, there's 20 people that are touching a deal. I don't know if let's call it double digits, maybe.
Yep.
Do you address that in how you build your buyer map and buyer personas and then subsequent content, and how do you do that?
Yeah, we do. It's a great question, actually, and something that's often overlooked. So each individual on what we call the BDT, the buying decision team, has their own buyer's journey. So, for example, like the final decision maker might not be as heavily engaged early in the process, but might get very heavily engaged at the end. A key influencer, might be engaged early on. It might fade away in the middle, but get re-engaged at the end. So you have to have these buying process maps for each individual buyer. Also, for each product that you sell. This is where it gets complex and it becomes a matrix because, just think about it. If I was going to go buy a house tomorrow, that's a different purchase decision than if I was going to go buy a plane ticket, right?
Yeah.
The way I go about that is different. So you do need to think about that. Where this all comes together and what you do with all this is in what we call a custom-built sales methodology. And understanding that at any given time, when you look at your BDT, let's call it 10 people, not everybody's at the same point. So if the decision maker is at step 4, but the influencer's at step 2, you need to take that into account as to how you sell that client. Because if you attempt to perform step 4 selling activities,
got it,
and the person's still at step 2, you're going to be out of sync.
Yeah. Interesting. I just thought of one thing we may have jumped ahead on. I wanted to throw this to you where I've heard a large spectrum of the actual, so we're talking about the buying process, but what about the buyer themselves? And I'm hearing stories of people trying to figure out what they eat for breakfast and those kind of things. And when as part of the diligence that we do in order to understand the buyer map, I'm assuming we spend some time crafting the identity of the buyer, or we don't, or we focused on the map. And I just wanted to get your feelings on, the role of the persona versus the map, or together, and how you look at things.
Yeah. Yeah, so the persona is different than the map, and it is important, and you have your classic ideal customer profile information on that. Company size, measured in revenue or employees, job title, years in the job, industry vertical, all of those things are still important for sure. And, these personas and these maps, serve multiple purposes, right? So, for example, the ICP stuff that I just mentioned might be used by marketing when segmenting a list to run a campaign. And without that information, it's not going to be very effective. So you have to have it. But that information is not very useful to the sales team. I mean, if you tell me that my client has 5,000 employees, I mean, what do I actually do with that, right? And that's where the buying process map comes in. That's more useful to the sales force. So the traditional buyer persona is as relevant as it's ever been. But when it's not accompanied by a buying process map, it's a tool that sits in marketing at 30,000 feet that the sales team can't do anything with. And the way you bring that down to the street level is through that mapping process.
How often do your organizations or top sales leaders update? Because you had said it changes all the time. I mean, I'm assuming there's a stake in the ground type of philosophy, but how fluid is this, and what does that mean to the sales organization that embraces this buyer mapping process?
And it's typically done on a quarterly basis, and it's added to your classic win-loss analysis. So in a normal environment, a VP of sales will go to a sales ops leader and say, hey, batch up all the deals that were won or lost this quarter. Let's pick a sample from those and go out to those customers and understand why we won, why we lost vis-a-vis the competition.
Yeah.
And, it's very helpful, useful exercise. And that's a good opportunity to build some of this buying process map stuff into that process so you can keep it updated every quarter. So it's really kind of a two-step evolution, right? So if you've never done it before, it's a heavy lift to get it off the ground just to get to, some type of working prototype.
Yeah.
But then after that, the iterations are pretty easy. It's just done once a quarter, and it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah. And I'm jumping all over I have a whole bunch of thoughts that just kind of come to mind as you're talking about things. So I apologize. They're kind of jumping into things out of order, but
Okay.
it's very interesting to me. So um, what type of, I've, as we talk about content, this just came to mind. So I actually feel like once you understand the buyer, that the sort of first couple steps of the buyer evolution, figuring out what content to create. I'm not going to say it's easy, but it's like, look, we understand their challenges. Let's go create some
Yeah,
third.
exactly. Yeah.
Um, what about content for close to the end of the buyer map, as they're starting to make their decision? Do we transition that into more product centric type content, or do we still continue to have the same mentality we had before in helping these guys advance the process? In particular, I'm talking about they're lining vendors up, then looking at vendors, or they're going through some kind of purchasing process. Where does content fit in there in that late stage of the buyer map?
Yeah. So the type of content there that I think is the best has been defined and advocated by the Sales Executive Council. It's called commercial insight content. I don't know if you've heard this phrase
No.
before, but I think it's a great way to think about it. And what commercial insight content says is that working backwards from the problem of the buyer, I'm going to present my solution in a way that is unique. In other words, I'm going to present my solution, not based on what's on an RFP spec. That's kind of table stakes, right? So I have to do that in order to be in the game. But
Right.
my above and beyond value add there is going to be about, you know, creating some type of uniqueness around your offering specific to that customer's problem. Now, it sounds obvious, and everybody says, yeah, 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 we do that. But like one of the things we do is in our consulting practices is called mystery shopping. And we'll shop our customers as if we're a prospect, and we'll shop our customers' competitors. And everybody says they do that, and nobody does.
Yeah.
They don't. I
No,
mean,
I know.
they get the material from product marketing, and they go in there and they do the same thing.
Yeah.
And you literally can take a logo off of one presentation and put it on the other presentation, from competitor A to competitor B, and you cannot tell the difference between the presentations.
Yeah.
So really thinking through the solution content, the product specific stuff back to the customer's problem. And sometimes it's just as simple as the words that you choose. Are you speaking in vendor speak? Are you speaking in customer speak? It can literally be almost the same exact presentation. You just change up the words and use the customer's words instead of yours, and it resonates more. And it creates differentiation in the eyes of the buyer.
Interesting. All right. Well, I love it. I love it. And so tell me, I know I've kind of alluded to this. I gotta ask you though. I mean, is this being embraced? I mean, again, I think we're changing people's mind, but you guys are doing so well. I gotta assume that um, this mentality is catching on. And by the way, there's other folks that are talking about
Sure.
similar ideas. Uh, I guess, I don't know, I'm bringing it up again. I just can't get over just what I know about my friends who are VPs of sales. And for me, it sounds so different for them. And so,
Yeah.
how are you winning people over? How are you winning people over? Or is this just a matter of, like, this is what the successful sales leaders are doing today?
Yeah. So here's how I would answer that, right? There's a classic distribution curve. Think of a bell curve, 20, 60, 20, right? So you got 20% early adopters, and I think we're clearly in the early adopter phase right now. The good news is that those people that have taken the leap, it's working, right? So like that group is expanding, and the folks that are doing that are breaking all the rules. Those are the guys at 150% of quota. Those are the VPs of sales that are entering their third or fourth year, versus getting fired between the first and second year. So there's all this, hard evidence that if you embrace this and you have the courage to do the work, because it's not easy, you get ahead, right? Then you got the middle group, the 60% group. And what's happening with them right now is because, guys like us are talking about this, they're becoming aware of it, as maybe a different way of doing things. They're interested, but they're not ready to take the leap. And they want to see, what happens to the lab rats, the people that try it first. But they're watching. And it's encouraging because, just the volume in my own practice, everything from website activity to telephone calls to it's getting to the point where it's a frequently requested service. Whereas I'd say this time last year, maybe not so much. I felt like we were evangelizing, and I feel less like an evangelist now and more of, the service provider. And then you got the 20% laggards that are digging their heels in, and they look at a guy like me and they say, here's another full of crap consultant, and he's all theory,
No, they don't say that.
Yeah, and it's never going to work in my industry because I'm a sample size of one. I'm the most unique business in the world, and this stuff doesn't apply to me. And you're always going to have that with those people.
Yeah,
You really
for
are.
sure.
So I think that's where we are.
Well, that's interesting, right? That's actually a perfect answer. I wasn't sure if I was just continuing to go down that road or there was something there, and that helps a lot. Essentially, the guys who are winning and are staying in their jobs have embraced this philosophy and idea. I like that. All right, well, let me do this. I got to do this to you, and I didn't prepare you for it, but I've been sitting there thinking about our conversation, and I did want to spend a couple minutes on social proximity territories. Is that all right?
Sure, absolutely.
What is that the right terminology?
It's the terminology that we're hearing the most of, social proximity, as a design principle in territory design. Yeah.
All right. So tell me, I mean, is that something you recommend? Is it something, or are you just supporting folks on? I mean, it's so new. It's so crazy to me. I mean, I'm a social guy. I get it. I mean,
Yeah.
and I've talked to Mike Lodato at Network Hardware Resale. He seems to have that going for him quite well. I'm surprised to hear that you're talking to people about it a lot. Well, first, just let's just clarify what that is. How do you define that type of territory design?
Yeah. Well, so first, I mean, territory design is defined as, assigning territories out to individual sales reps, number one, and then
Yeah,
assigning a quota to each individual territory, and then writing a comp plan that says if you hit that quota, this is what you earn, right? So that's territory design.
yeah,
And historically, the principles there have been really one of three things: geographic proximity, product specialization, or vertical industry knowledge. So most sales organizations will organize in one of those three ways. And geographic proximity is, well over half of the population out there. And the reason why that was around for so long is because, belly to belly, face to face selling was a requirement.
yeah,
Customers required you to call on them physically in order to do business.
yeah,
So it didn't make a lot of sense to take a sales rep in New York and have them call on an account in Miami, as an example. But today, the buyers are so much more comfortable, communicating as if we are today on video conference. Maybe not in entirety, but at least big pieces of the selling process can be done this way.
yeah,
And maybe you meet the customer, but it's, with less frequency.
yeah,
So because of that, the physical constraint of geographic proximity is going away. Utopia, absolute dream state for a VP of sales is you have your best reps on your best accounts. I mean, it's literally that simple, right? But if your best rep is in Los Angeles and your best accounts are in New York, up until now, you couldn't do it unless you asked your sales rep to move to New York. And very often, relocation is a tough thing for people to do, so it doesn't happen.
yeah,
But now, social proximity, if you can sell virtually, all of those things go out the window, right? And it's how close am I to you in my social network? And the way that people are doing this, and this is clearly bleeding edge at this point. I would put this at less than 5% adoption rate right now. Okay? The way people do it is they start with a dream client list, and they say, I don't know, here's 100 companies I'm not doing business with that based on their attributes, if we got their business, it would make my year. Okay? And then I map the social graph back from the decision makers. So if I know that, Joe Blow at XYZ company, if I got him as a client, he could single-handedly make my number, then I work through the social networks to say, how am I connected to that person?
yeah,
Is it fourth, third, second, first degree? And who do I know? Who's the guy that knows the guy that knows the guy that knows the guy,
yeah,
right? And I build these pathways. And a conversion in this scenario is very different. So if I want to know the guy who knows the guy, then I have to become relevant to the first, quote, guy. Then I got to get that guy to take me to the next guy. And then I got to become relevant to him. And all along the way, I've got to answer the WIFM question, right? What's in it for me? Why would you carry me forward? And the thinking there is that the conversion rates there are much higher than skipping those steps along the way and just blasting a telephone call into the decision maker or blasting a cold email into the decision maker. The belief here is that, there's nothing more powerful than word of mouth. And word of mouth used to be an offline activity. It's now an online activity. And if you can leverage it correctly, something like social proximity has a higher probability of cracking your dream accounts than geographic product or vertical industry proximity.
Hmm.
That's the idea behind it.
Have you seen it work? In that 2%, are we seeing success?
Spotty. There's success of, hey, we got this deal because of this. We generated this lead because of this, but the sample size is so small,
Yeah, it's hard to tell. Yeah.
that it's hard to really have any scientific evidence around it.
But do you think 5 years from now that number's how much higher is that number on social proximity design, territory design? Sorry.
Uh, and I say this as a member of the tribe, if my pig-headed VPs of sales can get out of their own way, I think it's going to be transformational. Um,
Yeah.
I mean, there's tools like LinkedIn has a Sales Navigator
Yep.
and Team Link that are just, I mean, the implications of the proper use of those tools, even in current state, forget about future state, is astounding. So I'm hoping that there's leaders in these chief sales officer seats that will, be the pioneers here and get behind this.
Yeah. Yeah. Really, it's really, I mean, it's really interesting. The one thing I struggle with is, well, you get this as much as I do. I get 5 cold LinkedIn requests a day, and they're
I know.
sales guys or random folks, and I obviously don't accept those. A s- I have my own rule of thumb, and so, uh, for me, I actually think social proximity is, in an ideal world, amazing idea, right? I mean, there's some sales rep has a direct line into where you need to be. You got to take advantage of that, whether they live
Yeah.
in California or New York. So I get it. But then, do we really know what their social proximity is? Has been my question. Is, there's a obviously complete. Let's just say from a LinkedIn perspective, there's just a big difference in who connects with who, right? In many ways, and so, are we really pinpointing who has the fastest line to a prospect or not. That for me is just kind of, but it's probably a small problem considering the bigger idea is much better than that. But I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Actually, I think it's a pretty big problem, and I agree with you, right? I mean, and it's the whole quality over quantity thing, right? So, up until this point, it's been how many connections do you have? Going forward, if social proximity is something like it's going to take root, it's not how many connections you have, it's what's the quality of those connections. You know, Brian Frank over at LinkedIn, who heads global sales ops there,
Yeah.
shared with me yesterday a really interesting thing. And they have literally have an algorithm that measures the quality of the connection, you know, relative to the goal. So if the goal is to get to my dream client, you can figure out, quality measurements
Right.
of your connections and rule out, the purchasing agent in Moscow might not be my guy. He might not be a step along the way.
Right.
But, the the guy that went to the same college or maybe belongs to the same club, maybe so much. So there's going to be some experimentation there. I think where people are going to realize the power of this is how search is being reinvented. We saw Facebook's announcement this week, which is just an absolute incredible announcement. And if they get it right, if I was Google, I'd be pretty worried right now.
Yeah.
I mean, if you search and you're now inside, you search for, I don't know, sales consulting services, just because that's near and dear to my heart. I either show up or I don't show up, based on my social proximity
Yeah.
to that individual. You know, who does my network recommend in that area?
Yeah.
And if your network's not pushing you up to the top and saying, these guys are really good, you don't even show up. So that's a different twist on social proximity, if you understand what I'm saying there.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. In other words, everything's social proximity. Well, becoming that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. It's. I don't know. I told you I wasn't going to talk about it, but then I'm like, man, if I could finally talk to someone, because it's so interesting, and it's just kind of, it doesn't plague me, but I think about it all the time. But gosh, in an ideal world, what a great way for us to organize the whole company. It's just thinking
Yeah.
about all of our social proximity and what it really means. The other thing I've been thinking about has been this, as the sales rep is actually the most effective channel from a lead nurturing perspective. All the marketing guys, as they work on their emails, I'm thinking, gosh, I was just talking to a client the other day, and we're looking at some of their sales guys' LinkedIn. I mean, the sales people are connected to VPs and CTOs, and the marketing department will never get to them with their latest lead nurturing
Yeah.
email, but the salesperson can. Um,
Yeah.
and that makes that their social graph is really powerful. It's really interesting conversation. Okay, I'll let you. I will not continue to push on that. I wanted to get because I did want to ask you one thing before you left, which is a general question, and we talked a lot. You talked about the single most important thing was being able to map the buyer. What else? Just give me I'm talking to. This is for sales leaders and successful ones at that. What are the other things that you're seeing the top most effective sales leaders today are doing? We talked about a couple things today that I felt were really important and exciting to talk about. Anything else that we didn't mention today that you would, just toss out as your State of the Union address?
I think there's two other things that I would leave with your audience, and they're byproducts of the changing buyer. I mean, fundamentally, if you think about it, it comes down to resource allocation. So if I'm a sales leader, what am I asking my people to do? Where am I spending my money, and where am I spending my time? I mean, people, money, and time are the resources that you have at your disposal to make the number. And how you choose to allocate those three things determines success or failure. And if you work backwards from the buyers we've talked about today, and you think about the ripple effect and how you reallocate people, money, and time, it's really amazing. So, for example, let's talk about people. If you look at all of the competency assessments that are out there today, and there's dozens of them, they're assessing competencies of sales reps from 10 years ago. I mean, here you and I are talking about a sales rep as a marketing channel,
Yeah.
right? And his social proximity as an indicator of success. So there's a new set of competencies there, right? How socially capable is that salesperson?
Yeah.
And if you look at the competency assessments that are used today to make hiring decisions, none of them include anything like that. They're still talking about things like persistence and, drive and ambition, like all of these things that are 50,000 feet in the air. And not to say that those things aren't important, but I'm hoping that we're getting to the stage where they're kind of table stakes. And then the real things that you need to assess for are, skills and capabilities of, the future salesperson, and the social stuff being only one example of it. So the talent equation, okay, is changing substantially.
Yeah.
So if you're a sales leader and you're asking yourself, okay, I want to become a social selling organization, however you define that, are my people capable of doing that? The answer is 99% of the time right now going to be no. So then it's, okay, do I train who I have right now, or do I start bringing people into the organization that possess those skills? And if so, where do I find them, and how do I get them?
Yeah.
So that would be the second big thing I'd mention to you.
Yeah.
And then the third big thing is the whole sales methodology space and sales process. I mean, the results from the commercially licensed methodologies right now, and as a benchmarking firm, I can say this as an empirical fact, are awful. The adoption rates, the consistency of use they're just not there. So what's happening is a salesperson goes to a solution selling course of your flavor, and they say, okay, so this is my call plan, and on the first call I'm going to walk in and I'm going to ask these questions. And they get the appointment and they walk in and the buyer, and they get through the first couple of questions, and the buyer has a total negative reaction because the buyer is already so informed, and the rep says, well, this isn't working. So, in the trash can, the call plan goes, and they got to wing it and start over. So what companies are doing right now, and I would advocate for this, is you do need a sales process, but the days of licensing a commercial process are over. You need to build a custom sales process that's hand in glove, reflects 100% accurately this whole buying process concept. And there's a big advantage in doing that, and that is this. It's now proprietary to you. So the way that you sell is going to be unique. Whereas, up until recently, everybody gets trained on solution selling, so all of the reps are engaging with the customers the same way. So there's really no differentiation there. If you build a custom sales process, you truly can differentiate by how you engage with customers at the moment of truth, the individual sales call. The customer is literally experiencing something different in their interaction with you than they do the next guy. And that's a real opportunity. It really is.
Yeah. Excellent. Perfect. I got more than I bargained for. I love it. Well,
Okay.
Greg, I just wanted to thank you for taking the time to do this with us today. It was a great session, and I would encourage anybody that's in the sales and marketing space to follow you and follow your blog. Is the best recommendation for them to go to your website and to pick it because you guys are creating content faster than anybody out there. So if you don't mind just telling the audience kind of how they could follow you and get their hands on a lot of your you and your team's thought processes.
Sure. Two ideas. So the website is salesbenchmarkindex.com, and our blog is right there on the homepage. That is the best that we do in terms of educational material. And you simply enter your email address to subscribe to the RSS feed, and we publish every day at 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, 365 days a year. That would be the first thing. And the second thing is you can follow us at @makingthenumber, which is our Twitter handle. And from time to time we put content out there that's different than blog content, and that would be another way to follow us.
Terrific. Well, again, thank you, Greg. I really appreciate the time. This is a great session. Thanks for being on with us.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having us.
No problem. So for everyone in the audience, again, this was a pleasure, and I hope you got a ton of value out of this. And as well, I hope this propels you to go see a lot of the work that Greg and his team have done and continue to do. Sounds like every day at 7 a.m., which is amazing. Another topic for us on how to scalably create content, but we can tackle that another time. But on behalf of Lattice Engines, this is Craig Rosenberg, and this is another session in understanding the successful modern sales leader. And we thank everyone for coming out today. And again, this, depending on how you consume content, we'll have this video, we'll create an ebook, we'll do some other things, and hopefully we can get some of these ideas to you to help you have a better 2013 and beyond. So thanks everyone, and again, thanks Greg.